languages in order to get better at programming. It's very, very meta. It's a service that comes in two parts. There's practice and there's feedback. And the practice happens locally on your machine. So we distribute a binary, and you use that binary to talk to a web API, and you get little problems. Those problems are in the format of a test suite, and you make the test suite pass. You submit that, and then on the website part of things, there's a conversation that happens with other people who have done the same problems or who know the language. There are sign-in boxes. Here, just a second.
You can hand me that. Anyone's first time in Vienna?
Mine.
Cool.
Anybody wants a pen?
Okay, so
Lots of pens
same
here.
story. Okay. Two parts, practice. You do that locally on your own machine. And one of the things that I think is interesting about solving problems on your local, in your local environment is that you use the tools that you always use. You use whatever workflow works for you. You're not in a browser, in a kind of maybe fake environment that doesn't quite match to what you usually work on. So practicing these problems is just programming. The feedback happens on the web. This is interesting and important. It turns out that the conversations that happen are actually much more interesting than the practice. You learn a lot more from having those conversations. And I'll get back to that. There are lots of languages, and the languages are kind of varied, I would say. You have anything from like enterprisey stuff to really kind of niche stuff that you may never have heard of. I certainly had heard of PLSQL, but had never written any, still haven't. Classics that have been around since forever, newcomers that kind of just were released in the last 5 years, languages that people admire, languages that people sneer at. And the point is that no matter what language you're working on, you can get better at it. So people use it for a number of, they have a lot of different goals when using it. Some people are quite new to programming and use it to just get their feet wet, learn some syntax, learn a language, figure out how to use standard library stuff, figure out how to simplify things and actually solve problems, which it turns out is hard even in English, not only just in programming. Programmers use it in two different ways usually, either to get better at the language that they work in primarily, so when they do practice, they will go very, very deep. In Ruby, they will monkey patch hash and try things that they might not try in production and have really interesting experiments and conversations about trade-offs and architecture. And it's really funny to have conversations about architecture when the code is 20 lines long. Some people, other programmers use it to get up to speed in a new language very quickly. So because you have people who know the language really well and know the idioms of the language, if you're solving a 20-line problem, they'll be able to say that, oh, well, we tend to do it in this way. We tend to name our variables in this way. Oh, there's a standard library call that you can use that will do all of what you wrote in all of these 10 lines. There's a one-liner for it. And so you get up to speed really, really quickly. And I said, I don't know if I said that there were 3 reasons that people use, but there are actually 4, because it turns out that there are people who just like puzzles, and so they show up just to solve the problems because it's fun. I learned this by emailing the people who use Exercism the most and asked them what they do, and they were like, oh, I'm an out-of-work aerospace engineer, and I just kind of like solving puzzles. Or I'm a philosophy professor at some university somewhere, and I wanted to learn Haskell, so I did. The real point of Exercism is the conversation that happens. The code is a starting point, and the conversation turns out is much more interesting than you might think, and it's really challenging to look at someone's code and have an idea about how that code could be better, and not just an idea of like, oh, that's not very object-oriented, it should be more object-oriented. That's not feedback, that's just some sort of vague opinion. Critiquing code needs to be specific. It needs to be about what you see there. You're talking about the structure that you see, not about what's lacking. You talk about very specific things, you make observations, and that process is actually quite challenging. And so it's the process of trying to give someone feedback is the same process that you would have in refactoring some code and looking at some code and trying to articulate what you don't like about something, why you don't like it, how it could be done better, or even just have a conversation about the trade-offs that they make. My experiences are very different from your experiences because we've worked on very different types of problems, and so the things that I can learn from you will make my code stronger. And even though it might sound like we have very, very different opinions, it might turn out that we agree on some of the core principles and that it just looks very, very different in our code. Exercism happened entirely by accident. It started almost 2 years ago, and I just made it as a workflow optimization to help out with some stuff at work. I was mentoring some students, and they never finished their warm-ups, and so I wanted a system that would let them, that would make them finish one thing before they would be allowed to move on to the next thing. It turned out also that after 6 months of working with these students, I was seeing them make some very, very common mistakes that we should have cleared up like months ago. I was like, what? We've been doing these warm-ups since forever. Why are you still making this mistake? Well, it turns out because we never had the conversation. And so making Exercism put the code at the center and let us have the conversations about naming and about enumerables and about sort of all the basic things. I wrote it on the plane to a conference. I came back, I showed it to my students, they tweeted about it, and the next day I had someone from Germany and someone from Brazil using it, and then within a week it was like Australia and all over the States, and within 3 weeks there were 700 people using it, and I had no idea what to do. It was going to be an experiment in using MongoDB. Yeah, that ended really quickly. Over time, like, all of the features on Exercism are completely by accident. Someone asked for something and I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun, let's try that. Which means that there's no design. It's completely, it's very, very difficult to understand how it works, why it works, where you should begin, what you can do there. Like, you go to the homepage and it's like, oh yeah, you do practice problems. Well, there are 20 languages. Do we actually mention those? No, sorry. We'll get to that. About 10,000 people have submitted code, which is a pretty big number. About 100,000 people have signed in. I think all of them signed in so that they could maybe figure out what it was, and then they gave up because they couldn't figure out, which is why only 10% actually submit code. The community is very welcoming. It's chaotic, both in terms of the contributions to the code bases themselves, and also in the conversations. People are very helpful. They're very willing to help you figure something out. I get emails from people saying that you just accepted my first ever pull request to open source. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I regularly help people figure out Git because I want people to be able to contribute. I want people to feel that sense of empowerment of being able to go on the web and change something that was wrong and make it better. So I do whatever I can, even though the project is chaotic, it is chaotic in a very friendly way. There are many ways to contribute. There are about 50 repositories. Most of them are just single language repositories for problems in a single language. And we're adding more languages as people kind of want them. This is how we end up with PL/SQL and OCaml and dlang. There's a website, it's kind of in Ruby, kind of in JavaScript. There's definitely stuff in there in CSS, I think. Everything that looks nice on the website was done by someone else. Basically, they just felt sorry for me, so they fixed it. Most of the backend stuff is in Ruby, mostly in Sinatra. There's a little bit of Go. There's a little nitpicking robot, because I got sick of saying the same things over and over again, so we do some static analysis and then have a little friendly robot, it's written in Go, submit some comments. And then the command line client is in Go. I have a whole list on here. This is probably the only thing you're going to see for reals in my slides is the link that you should see, which is the GitHub project that I made for ROSCONF, which is kind of a curated list of issues where I've made a good attempt at giving some high-level information about what the problem, I think, is, what the solution could be, where you need to go to do it, how to break things down, etc. So there's lots to do there. The most important thing on Exercism is the conversations. Everything else is secondary, and so everything I think that can be done should be done in order to help facilitate those conversations. At the moment, as you may have noticed this morning, Aaron had a hard time explaining what the site is. That's the case for everyone. You go to the site and it's kind of not clear. What is Exercism about? How do you get started? What languages can you do? What does the process look like? And I think if you don't know what the process looks like, it's quite unlikely that you're going to go in and have a good conversation because you don't know that that's even the purpose of the site. So a lot of the issues that are listed are about improving the conversation. In particular, improving the process of getting started with Exercism. Another thing that's a lot of fun is expanding the language tracks. So adding more problems to existing languages, adding new languages, fixing edge cases in problems that are already around. Yeah, so architecture is the big thing that you're not seeing there. I have some big-ish features that I'm trying to figure out how to solve. And so if you like thinking about sort of how pieces should fit together, come talk to me because I need an extra pair of eyes and an extra brain to bounce ideas back and forth. I don't know UX, so if you know UX, I would love to talk to you. I'm serious. It's really, really bad. No, I'm really, really serious. It's really awful. So any sort of help figuring out information architecture or how to explain things, I will seriously be in your debt and owe you a beer. And that's it.